see the screen? Oh, everybody can hear me, that's also nice. I'm honored to introduce to you the keynote speaker of tonight, Dr. Martin de Graaf. He received his PhD in evolutionary ecology and fisheries at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. But many of you might know him or have seen him before, because he's the leader of the research group on fisheries in the islands Bonaire, Eustatius and Saba. And actually I know him because last year I did research myself on those fisheries here on Saba. And therefore I would really like to thank you that you give me this opportunity to do this research. And let's give him a big applause. And take it away.
Everybody else's work except my own, because I haven't really done a lot. I just have students that do the work for me, luckily. Set. Thank you. No, I'll do it like that. As Imke mentioned, I started my dubious career in Africa, where they sent me to study all kinds of complicated evolutionary things. But as soon as I arrived in Africa, the local officials said, we're not really interested in evolution and ecology, we just want to know what kind of fish we have and how much we can fish. So I had to change my whole PhD, and it went from sort of evolution into fisheries. And actually that was a good move, because after that I sort of stuck in fisheries. After Africa, I moved to Australia, and I lived and worked there for 5-6 years. I worked at the Department of Fisheries, Western Australia, and one of the main things I worked there was with freshwater lobster, but they grew to about the size of about ocean lobsters. After a couple of years there, I went back to Holland. In Holland, I'm the project leader of sort of 3 research groups, and the head of the freshwater section, and the main thing about that is the eel fishery in Holland, which is what we call pain in the behind file, because it's not going well with the eel fishery. There's a lot of jobs at stake, etc., etc. So that's when I go to meetings like that, usually it's a room of angry fishermen. Trust me, it's interesting, but a little bit challenging. Apart from that, I run the research group on recreational fisheries, and the only reason I can actually stay and live in Holland is because I'm also the project leader of the Caribbean work. I mean, I like Holland a lot, as long as I can leave it on a regular basis. And this project gives me that opportunity. Why study fish and fisheries? Well, there's a couple of really boring reasons. Most countries, or islands, island nations, simply they have international obligations to just report to institutions like the FAO a rough estimate of their catches. Now, that's not very sexy or interesting, that's just one of the boring reasons why you do fish and fisheries research. What I find more interesting is that if you have a proper, simple fisheries research program, it will provide you the basic information on your stocks, it will provide you the basic information on your fisheries, it will provide you some information of the role of fishery in the community and economy, and actually the most important one is unknown is unloved. One of the issues that you see, or what I've seen on the islands that I work, is that there's hardly any interest by local government in fisheries or fisheries issues. And that's partly also due because none of the governments actually know anything about the fisheries going on in their islands. Now, by providing some basic information, like if it's no information, it's very easy for the government to say, oh, I don't know, I'm not going to really do anything. But when you have some information there, you can stick it in their faces, then it gets a little bit more tricky for government to sort of completely deny the existence of a fishery. So that's one of the reasons that I try to promote to the fishermen, like it's not scary to work with this research program, it can actually be beneficial to you. Now basically, if you have some proper information on your fish stocks and your fishery, it will actually be the solid basis for a sustainable management, or at least a type of management of your fish stocks. Now, what is the role of people like me in fishery science? Now, I'll try to give you a story of how a scientist usually sort of gets squashed between people. This is roughly usually what happens in my line of work. You have one group of stakeholders, for example the fishermen, that in general don't want to be bothered and want to be left alone, and they just want to fish whatever they want and don't want to be disturbed. Then usually on the other hand, it's a bit sort of drastic. But on the other hand, you have conservation groups that usually have valid reasons, like they both have valid reasons, but they just sometimes they conflict, the conservation groups and the exploitation groups. Now the poor government usually sits in the middle. So they have to listen to both groups, come up with a compromise, look at employment, look at food supplies, look at biodiversity, etc., etc. And they have to come up with and then they got to negotiate with both parties and come up with a solution. Now that's where science sort of feeds in. When these groups sit together around the table, it's sort of the job of people like me to make sure that there is some information on the table they can discuss about. Also to make my job technically quite easy. The only thing I have to worry about is providing solid, reliable information. Now I don't make the decisions about policy, etc., etc. No, I just provide the information, I put it on the table, and then it's up to the stakeholders in the government to decide what they're going to do with the resources. In a way, I don't really care. I mean, it's the responsibility for government to decide what they're going to do with their fish stocks. So it's my responsibility to make sure that there's proper information for the stakeholders to sort of fight about during the negotiations. Sometimes, of course, we do provide advice or we provide scenarios. We help with developing reference points, saying where do you want to be with your fishery, what is good and what is bad. Of course, we can determine the current status of a fish stock or a fisheries. What we cannot do, unfortunately, is predict the future, which is very disappointing, but that's unfortunately the way it is. What you have to keep in mind is on these small islands is that in general capacity is limited, and that's not a bad thing. It's just the way it is, and you got to work with that. So if you have limited capacity and you are going to develop some sort of fisheries management plan, keep it simple. I mean, I've seen enough very thick fancy reports, nothing gets of it. If you have limited resources, keep your aims and your targets limited. Then you are more likely to actually fulfill it and everybody's happy. Otherwise you just end up with a whole bunch of frustrated fishermen, nature groups, policy members, etc., etc. Now for the people who were last year, this is a bit of a repeat from last year, but then we move on to the new stuff, so don't worry. Just to give you an example of what sort of management measure could look like. Like lots of management plans, they say, oh, we're going to have sustainable fisheries. Okay, what is that? How is that defined? Can you give me a number to see whether you reach that or not? I'll give you a very simple example for conch, and we'll come back to conch later. The objective could be to conserve the population of conch, but also protect and preserve the fishery on conch. You can, for example, come up with some reference points. Now we know from research that you need at least 150 to 100 adults per hectare to have a healthy reproductive population. If you go below that, your reproductive activity will get into problems. So you can come up with a very simple system where you say, okay, well, our limit is 150 adults, so we put that here. But just be on the safe side, because science always has a little bit of insecurity around it, you set a threshold a little bit higher. If your science is really poor, the difference between the limit and the threshold should be really high. If you have really good confidence in the science and you really got accurate numbers, you can put these two together. This is like a management safety buffer. So this is what I determine, this is what the government should determine. And if they don't trust me, then this point will be here. If they do trust me, this point will be there. So this is a very simple example of how a proper management rule for conch would work. Now, how do you see where you are with you do standard conch surveys, which is misspelled there. And you do that every year. And this will then provide you where you are. And if you start hitting the yellow, that should trigger management. If you hit the red, it should really trigger management. Try to rebuild the stocks. So this is a very simple example of just a very basic, simple piece of management, or how it should be developed. As you said, there's usually a lack of these simple reference points. So one of my jobs here is to provide reference points to local government so they can actually start building up their management. A couple of other things you've got to keep in mind, especially on these islands where there's limited data. Populations in general, is it light? Yes. Like fishermen never catch the same thing. There's never the same fish every year. There is just a bit of natural variation. And what you've got to be careful of is you have one study done here, one study done there, and the management goes like, oh Jesus, we lost our stock halved. But this is just part of a natural fluctuation. So you've got to be very careful if you have limited information not to jump to conclusions. A classic example is also seasonality. Now, a reasonable scientist should understand this concept, so it shouldn't jump to conclusions. I mean, it has happened before that you do a study during the peak season, the next scientist comes and does a study during the low season. Again, he concludes, oh, we've lost all our conch, we've got to do something. No, they're just part of the seasonal cycles. So the point here is, people like me and people that read the reports that we write, don't jump to conclusions too fast. Keep it simple, and preferably have a mixture of what we call fishery dependent and fishery independent surveys. So fishery dependent is basically collecting fisheries data. Fishery independent surveys are sort of surveys conducted by scientists, very often together with fishermen, but separate from the fisheries. By the way, if you disagree with me or you got questions, please heckle me and ask questions. Don't wait till the end. So that was sort of the introduction of sort of the role, what I'm trying to do here, what we're trying to do here, don't get me wrong here. So I'll give some examples of the work we've been doing in the last year and a half on the Saba and fisheries. As you remember, there's probably ink sitting here right there. Just for your, to orientate yourself a little bit, there's a couple of Dutch islands. Now we recently started working on the southern part of the Caribbean. We've mainly been focusing here on Saba and Eustatius. The nice thing about Saba is, and that's actually a very lucky thing, the divers go here and the fishermen go there. So in general there's not that much conflict here. If you compare it with Eustatius, where the fishermen, the divers and the oil terminal are all literally on the same spot. Lots of issues. Here you're more or less lucky where at least the divers and the fishermen are separated. And most, like I said, the majority of fishing occurs on the bank and the surrounding waters. So what does the fishery look like here on Saba? Now, it looks pretty small because you only have 9 boats, but you have to think about it sort of a very small island with few people. So actually, it actually plays quite a big role in society. There's quite a few people, in percentage-wise, involved in fisheries here. So we've got 9 boats, they're all roughly the same. There's these inboard diesel boats. It's mainly divided in a lobster trap fishery, which is on the top of the bank, with traps. Then there is a fishery for redfish, or different snapper species in the deeper waters, on the slopes of the bank. Then there is some hand lining on red hind. And of course, when the season's there at the moment, the wahoo are doing really well, then the fishermen also start trawling. Not only the commercial fishermen, but also other people with boats in the area. The lucky thing about Saba is we actually have some historical information. That's right. There was Faisal de Rozen here. We have contact with him. I met him a couple of weeks ago. He was here for a year and studied, collected basic fisheries data. And then Wes Stoller was here for 6 months in 2007 and collected some information. Already you can already see here a problem. He's got data from 1 year, he's got from a half year. They already have the issue, like how can we compare that? You only got half year data. So there you already go into trouble. So what does fisheries monitoring look like? Well, Saba is a dream for a fisheries scientist because there's only one harbor and all the boats land their catch on the docks. So it's easy. The only thing you have to do is spend a lot of hours running around in the harbor. In the morning, we just look at all the moorings so we can see every day. We record which boats are out, which boats are in. So we get a really good idea about how many fishing trips there are. When the boats come back, we do several things. One thing is a short interview, which only takes a couple of minutes. The fisherman comes in, we quickly ask them, where did you go fishing, which gear did you use, what did you catch? And we ask them extra questions about also whales and dolphins to build up a little bit of a database. Now, probably 1 in 4 trips to get a short interview. Roughly 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 trips you do what we call a long interview. And that's usually a bit more annoying for a fisherman. It's where we actually measure the whole catch. So we look at species composition and length frequency. We always keep a good eye on the facial expressions of the fishermen, because when they start turning sour, we stop and move on to something else. Also, what we've started, and that we haven't done it in the past, we've done some on-board sampling. So we actually went with the fishermen on board and also looked at the fish that were discarded. And you got the landed catch and you got the discarded catch. So for the first time we got some information on discards and on size and maturity, but I'll come back to that later.
Do they provide this information voluntarily?
Yes.
So they can tell you to bugger off if they want to?
Yes, they could. But luckily they don't.
Okay.
Who determines the size of the actual net?
The size of the?
The net. I mean, if it's a small net and they're catching everything. So, I mean, in European fisheries, the control...
The mesh sizes.
Yes. So
Well, technically speaking, already 10 years ago, actually Saba and some of the islands actually have a quite long list of rules and regulations. The only issue is the enforcement is not really up to scratch. So actually there's quite a few rules and regulations already in place for more than 10, 15 years.
but are they adhered to?
I'm not quite sure, because like that's, again, that's my lucky point. I'm only a scientist. I don't cooperate with compliance. Like I said, that's one of the only way, as you mentioned there, the only way the fishermen cooperate with us is that they trust us. Now, fisheries data in Holland is protected under the law of private information. It's just business information. So if a fisherman tells me how much he caught or I measure his catch, that information is just 100% private. Anybody can ask for it, nobody's going to get it from me. The only way I can present the data, as I do now, is aggregated. I can say the total catch is this, or the average catch is that. But I cannot say Michelle caught last year so many tons of lobster. If I do that, I'm off to jail. Simple as that. So if that relationship is established, then usually cooperation goes reasonably smooth. So far, no complaints. A few things about the lobster fishery. What you see here is, these are data from the guys before us. This is IMCA's information. What you roughly see is that the number of lobster per fishing trip, the standardized fishing trip, has actually decreased a bit from around 80 lobsters, which is also roughly 80 kilograms, to an average sort of 50, 60 kilograms or 50 or 60 lobsters. Now, so you've seen a bit of a drop from there to there, and there's not much of a change between 2007 and 2012. A couple of other things between those three different periods. What you see is that the number of traps that they pull a bit more traps now than they did 13 years ago. Now that's a bit of a sign that they have to put a little bit more effort to remain their income at the same level. If you look at the total catches, estimated, roughly 60 tons 13 years ago, almost 100 tons in 2007, and in, last year around 40 tons. Now, does this mean that we're in trouble now? Well, unfortunately, these are sort of the catches in general in the whole Caribbean. First of all, to put Saba in perspective, the total catch of lobster is whatever, 20, 25, 30,000 tons a year. So the 40 tons that we catch is less than 0.5% of the total catch. So that puts Saba in perspective in the Caribbean. And one of the issues we see in general in the wider Caribbean is that since the early 1990s, in general, the lobster catches have been declining in the wider Caribbean. So in a way, what we see here in Saba sort of fits the general profile from the wider Caribbean. Now, why this is occurring, not 100% sure yet. There's of course some issues with fisheries, with regulations. There's also an issue with a virus, especially in Florida, which actually kills off a lot of the juveniles. So at this point, as I said, I don't jump to conclusions, and I don't. This is just a situation as it is now. We need to brew and stew on it for a little bit longer to actually draw some conclusions from that. But this is the way it is at the moment. Now, we've done some more funkier stuff on lobsters. Maybe a few lessons here. The difference between a male and a female. The female has sort of a split leg at the end. The male has a pointy leg, and she uses it to sort of groom her pleoplots, where she attaches the eggs to. This is a female. You can see her tar spot and eggs. The tar spot is actually nothing more than a sperm plug. So when they mate, they store the sperm, and when she's ready to lay the eggs, then she actually uses the sperm stored here to fertilize the eggs. Usually some of the graphs you will see on, and when the fishermen talk about fishing, or about lengths of lobster, they always talk about carapace length. And carapace length is when you measure a lobster between the spines and the top of the head till sort of where the tail bends. So that's carapace length. That's usually sort of the language that we use in the lobster. Some of the work we've done that haven't been done before is we try to figure out at what size male and female lobster mature. Now, why is that interesting? In classical fisheries biology, you always try to make sure that your minimum legal size is slightly above the size where the animals become mature. Although there's a lot of doubt about it at the moment internationally, but that's the classic fisheries science. Now, we have a legal size here. In most of the Caribbean it's 95 millimeters. But on Saba we've actually never looked whether or not at what size the lobsters mature. Now with the females it's quite easy, because when they have eggs or a sperm plug, they're reproductively active. But how do you determine from from a boy lobster on the outside, whether he is sort of ready for action or whether he's still in puberty. The funny thing is, don't ask me why, but the second pair of walking legs, when the lobster becomes mature, starts growing a bit faster than the rest of the body. So you can see that here, that all of a sudden, the length of the leg compared to the length of the body starts growing a little bit faster. Now, again, I'm not 100% why, but that's actually the sign of maturity here. So Imke was the first one that did it here on Saba. So for the males, we know now that around 50% of the males on Saba is mature at around 90 millimeter carapace length. Now that fits very nicely with the minimum legal size of 95 millimeters. So from a classical fisher's point of view, all good. For the females, we haven't done it yet because you have to do this during the peak spawning season, which is March, May. So that will be Jimmy's job, who has just been hired for this kind of stuff. He'll be doing this in March and May to sort out for the females. When Imke was here, it was in the non-reproductive season and we can't make these graphs here. So, what is the size frequency look of the fishery? Don't get too much in about the details. This is just a legal size, and this is sort of the distribution of the lengths of the lobsters on Saba. Now, roughly what you see here is that most of the lobsters caught are well beyond the minimum legal size. I've also been to other islands. I mean, the Saban lobster are large lobsters that are being landed. So this all looks pretty healthy from a classical fisheries point of view. Now, they don't only land lobster, they also land fish. Roughly what they land is small groupers, like the red hinds, the conies, and grunts. At the same time, fishermen take some of the smaller fish, some of the coffer fish and the surgeons, not so much to sell to the customers, but when the lobster is being brought in, it's stored into live wells at the docks. You might even see it when you hop on your boat. You see the ropes there, that's where the lobsters are being held. And then just chuck a few of these fish in to actually feed the lobsters in the holding cages. Now, for the first time, we should also know what they throw back. And don't look at the details, but roughly this figure almost looks the same. So roughly what they throw back is roughly what they land, but these are mainly, but they're all on average a bit smaller than the ones that they land. Now there's a couple of interesting things that came out of this work, and the nicest one is this one. Now like I said, when we do a short interview with a fisherman, please believe what he tells us. Now, based on the interviews with the fishermen, they said that on average they were catching 13 kilograms per day fishing with the lobster traps. But of course, when we measure the whole catch, we can actually calculate it ourselves. And out of our calculations, it turned out to be it's not 13, but it's 16, or potato. I mean, I was quite happy with that. So hardly any difference between what a fisherman tells us face value and what we actually reconstructed from our own measurements. So I'm actually quite happy with that. Not surprised, because I must say I was expecting that, but it's still nice to see that at least the fishermen are quite honest in telling their catches. One interesting thing about the discards is that you don't really see the nurse sharks in here because in number it's less than 2%, but they are usually quite big. But if you look at the discards, the number of fish returned and not landed, actually nurse shark almost make up 10% of the weight of the discarded fish of a standard fishing trip.
Are they thrown back live, theoretically?
Theoretically, yes. I mean, on the trips that I've been on, I've seen them being returned live to the water. Like I said, that was a little bit about lobster fishery. We quickly move on to the snappers. Almost a similar story. Again, these are the three different periods. These are your snappers here. It's just a mixture of species. What you see is that over the period, on average fishing trip, a fisherman is pulling more and more gear, just to make sure that they retain their income. Because what you see in the average catch of a trip has been going down from about 150 kilos per standardized trip to about 100 kilos. So for a fisherman to maintain his salary, he just has to pull, he has to work harder to maintain his salary at the same level. If you look at the species composition, by far the dominant species is this big blue one. This is what they call the silk or the yellow-eyed snapper. You won't see that diving because these are deep water species. The second place is taken by the blackfin. An interesting one that we saw for the first time in 2012, and not in the older studies, is a lane snapper. And that one you might see on the reef, because that's a snapper that lives between the shallow water and the deeper waters. So I was a bit surprised to find this species, because it's a bit shallow. But apparently one of the fish buyers here said he wanted to have those fish. So he asked the fisherman to put the traps a bit shallower, and hence the fish shows up. So in a way, we're looking at species composition, I can already say roughly where the traps have been sitting. Now there's actually two different methods that they use here to fish for redfish. One is with the traps, by far the most common. But some fishermen also go long lining, then they actually go a little bit deeper than the traps. And as you see, just looking at the colors, don't forget about the names, it looks completely different. So with the long lining, they're actually targeting a complete different group of fish again. They're getting this nice one, the dolphin tail, which is a nice, not so much a very nice round snapper, good fillets out of that. And one of the other ones you bring up from the deep is the wenchman. Now to get a bit of an idea what is being caught roughly by the redfish trap fishery, it was 11 tons 13 years ago, it was 40 tons in 2007 and roughly 40 tons again last year. The interesting story here was, and I still haven't heard the details about it, but apparently the fishermen themselves put in a sort of a non-fishing pact for several years as far as the stories that I know, but the fishermen decided themselves to actually close the snapper fishery for a couple of years. And they just started fishing again the last 3 months of this person's study. 4 times 11, you come to 40 tons again. So, like I said, I still need to talk a bit more with the fishermen about exactly what happened in the period 1997 to 2000 when they won this, not by government enforced, but by the fishermen themselves. They put in a voluntary ban for themselves. Right, that was actually sort of the boring stuff. It's not for me, and it might be boring to the fishermen, but this is actually your bread and butter for your management. And now there's, in a way, no turning back because the information is there, and hopefully it will be used in the next couple of years. Now, the other thing that we do is the Fisheries Independent Surveys. Now, traditionally, when people study fish, they do a diving survey. Now, last year, as part of my my training program with the people from Sea&Learn, we did a fish survey. Everybody felt absolutely miserable, and they found out that it's extremely difficult to count fish during a dive. You have to be highly trained. It's difficult to estimate lengths. Fish go all over the place. And with diving, I mean, the Saba bank, you can dive there, but it's challenging diving. And also, I'm interested in, because the fishery occurs from the surface to up to 400 or 500 meters. I can't go diving at 500 meters, but I can drop cameras. Now, Wouter was the first student here who worked on using what we call the stereo baited remote underwater video. The nice thing about the Graafs is that, like I say, you got 2 cameras. Now, with software, and when you synchronize everything, you actually get stereo video. So afterwards, when we analyze the video, you have your left camera and your right camera. And with the software, you can click on the nose, the tail, the nose, and the tail, and it will give us the length in millimeters of this nurse shark, which was 113 or something. So the nice thing about this is, you get really accurate measurements. It gives you information on species richness, relative abundance, leg frequency, etc., with limited or no observer bias. The other good thing is that with cameras is that you get a much better idea about your sharks and your large predators. Because usually when you go diving, you hit the water, anything large and sort of commercially interesting, poof, it's gone. Of course, with these cameras, we use a little bit of bait. We bring in the larger animals. So, Wouter came here last year, and his idea was to do this on the Saba bank, but the research vessel, which is a story by itself on the island, quite sure you might hear it at some point in the bar, it wasn't really functional till 3 days before he left Saba. So we actually changed the plan, and we did a survey around Saba, about Saba itself. So we dropped the cameras at 50 meters and 100 meters to have a look at actually how the fish community looks around Saba itself. One of the things that became obvious straight away, and it's nothing new in a way, is that complexity, reef structure, is the dominant feature in determining species richness, biomass, and number of fish. So what we do is, when we drop the camera, we sort of give, we number sort of the complexity from 0 when it's just flat sand, to 4 or 5 when it's really extreme, complex habitat. And what you see is really nicely, no matter what no matter what way you sort of organize your habitat, number of species increases. This is almost too perfect, this graph. Walter? But I'm quite sure he's done it honestly here. But you really see here that when your habitat becomes more complex, you go from on average 3-4 species on a camera drop to up to 30 species on a camera drop. Really nicely, and again it shows again, I mean, fish don't really eat coral, yeah, a few of them do, but so you don't need coral to feed fish. You need coral to create the structural complexity to bring in the fish communities. If you lose your coral, your complexity will fade down, and you'll start losing species and biomass from your system. Again, this is nothing that nobody has ever said before, but it's nice to see that at least some of these basic information came out the same way also with this new camera technology. A couple of things that we did. So when we sampled around Saba, of course there is one area here, the recreational diving zone, where you can dive, you can fish. Most of the rest of the island you can pretty much do what you want. You could fish, you could dive, etc. So we were interested in comparing sort of the fished and the non-fished zones to see if there's any differences. Now for the black here is the non-fish, that's the areas where fishing occurs, and the light bars are the areas where no fishing occurs. I actually see that for a lot of the fish, like the surgeonfish, the parrotfish, there's not much of a difference between the reserve and the multi-use area. Again, these are also not really targeted by fishermen anyway, these species. When you start looking at the species that are a bit more interesting for fishermen, if fishing would occur, then it's the red hind and the coney. Now for the coney we didn't see much difference between the reserve and the multi-use zone, the fish zone. Only for the red hind we found a difference in average biomass, sort of in the fish zone. That was quite a bit lower than in the non-fish zone. So overall, not a large difference between the reserve and the multiple use zone. And it doesn't mean that the reserve is a bad idea or it doesn't function. As I told you before, most of the fishing activity on Saba occurs on the Saba bank. Now, if you have heavy fishing, you expect a really big difference here. If you don't have that much fishing, of course you don't find a lot of difference between your non-fishing zone and your fish zone. So don't go, again, don't hop to conclusions here. I think one of the things it shows here is that the fishing pressure at the moment around the island of Saba is probably not that high. Or there is also fishing happening in the marine reserve. But I think probably the people that are on the water every day, the dive instructors, know whether or not this makes sense or is true. But my impression is that most of the fishing occurs on the bank. There is some fishing around the island, but it looks like it's not too much. Like I said, except for the red hind, we do find a difference. Only in the shallow waters. In the deeper waters, again, there's no difference between the reserve and the multi-use zone. The same pattern you find actually in the length. Yeah, if you again compare the fishing zone, the non-fishing zone, with the conies, we didn't find a difference, but we find larger red hind in the reserve than in the fish zone. And this fits the pattern. We find less hinds in the fish zone, and we also find smaller hinds in the fish zone. So there is a bit of an effect there, especially the red hinds. Again, they're one of the most popular reef fish to target. Right, now we have a few action pictures. Now, I've got a couple of movies here that they're partly from the Saba bank, partly around Saba. The first movie, keep an eye on this area here, and there's something coming down there too. Oops. So there is a few grouper left around Saba, although we haven't seen that many, must be honest. And of course, we've seen a lot of sharks during our movies. The nurse sharks are a little bit of a problem, because sometimes the camera comes up and the bait bag is gone. Usually because of this kind of behavior. Most fish are attracted by the bait, but only very few fish actually attack the bait. The nurse, the conies come in now, but the nurse shark is clearly an exception to that rule. And we have lost the old bait bags. This is actually a movie from around Statia. Oh. This ray came back about 4 times, first in the distance, then they came back closer by, then they came back closer by, and then they came back closer by again. Actually, we haven't seen these on the cameras around Saba, but on the station we picked up a couple. As I said, shark activity is quite common. There's a little Caribbean reef shark. The difference between the Caribbean reef shark and the blacktip is that actually the Caribbean reef shark, his second fin is black. So in the blacktip shark, that last fin is white or light. Just to make it a bit more confusing with the naming. Here we go to 50 meters. This is a drop around Saba at 50 meters. And it was quite surprising to see that still a lot of the sort of shallow water reef fish still occur there. Because if you go to most fish books that you see here, things like parrotfish and the angelfish, it say occurs up to 90 feet or 60 feet. But we've actually found quite a few of these traditional shallow water species, at least up to 50 meters depth. Now we go to 100 meters. This is without lights. Cameras nowadays are quite sensitive. Again, a total different community. At 100 meters deep, you lose all your reef fish, except for this little cottonwig there. But these are all the yellow-eyed snappers, the redfish. Yellow eyes. You've got no black fin. Sounds like you have to reanalyze Vaad. Right, we have in the last summer we actually had Jelma here, and he started actually dropping some cameras on the Saba bank, what actually was Wouter's plan. We also have a new student in Antoine, he arrived last week, and he's going to finish the survey on the Saba bank going all the way to the back. Now, on the Saba bank you actually find some larger animals. This is a nice 3-meter tiger shark. This is a drop more or less in the middle of the bank, what they call sort of the dead zone. The fish don't really go there a lot. But as you see, there's not much structure and habitat, there's a bit of algae. But the fish biomass is quite high, because if you get one of these coming by, that adds up to your numbers. That's another one, it's not the same one, because you know the lengths. Again, in the shallow, in the flat areas. And then we had a little tricky one. That wasn't really the idea. If you look, I'll play it again, you'll see a little tooth breaking off at least, so there's a little bit of vengeance there. Because the thing he's chewing on is $500 worth. You see at some point? Oh, there goes the tooth. Luckily he's got lots of them. I think the shark scientists told about that. So actually we've seen, we only did 40 drops, we had 3 tiger sharks. Now tiger sharks are generally a rare species, apparently not on the Saba bank. Right, we move away from the fish and actually come back to the conch that I started the presentation with. When I started these projects here, I had no idea I would end up actually studying conch. But I'm actually growing to like that animal quite a bit. One of the things is it doesn't run away when you want to measure it and count it. That makes it quite easy. As you will, and maybe some people here that's going to come with me conch hunting tomorrow. It's quite easy if you know where to find it. Oh, this is, by the way, our new captain, Kuchi. He's working with the Saba Bank Management Unit, a very reliable captain. What we've been doing on Statia, and actually this project is going on as we speak also on Saba. There's 2 other students here, they're sitting in the back there, Ayumi and Evelyn. They're also using a simple camera, a drop camera, around Saba as we speak. Same way we did on Statia, and they drop it on hundreds of locations, and we use that to actually make a map of the habitat around these islands. So in this case, blue is a Gorgonian reef, green is an algae bed, yellow is sand, etc., etc. So we'll use this to make a spatial model and actually get a bit of an idea about the habitats around Statia and Saba. Now why do you want to know that? Because if you develop a survey, well, you could do it randomly around the islands, but it's nicer, you get better data if you can say, no, we're going to randomly look at fish per habitat. That gives us a bit of cleaner data. So one of the first things you want to do is get a bit of an idea of your habitat. Then we have to count the conch. Now in shallow water, it's beautiful to go diving for conch. Like I said, they don't run away, it's very easy. Unfortunately, around Saba, around Statia, and probably also here, the conch go down up to 50 meters. Then it gets a bit more trickier to do a lot of dives and count the conch. So actually Jimmy, who is also here, which I mentioned before, there he is again, he was the first one to develop for me this towed video system. So what it is, it's a little camera that floats. Oh. And there's a little chain on it that keeps it in touch with the bottom. So there is contact with the bottom, but only by a thin chain. There's two cameras in there. There's one camera that goes onto the boat, and that is directed forward. Because we only use this in flat areas, but we do every now and again need a fish trap or a big piece of reef that we didn't know was there. So at least we have an opportunity to bring the gear up before we hit something. And the second camera actually points down and actually films a transect. Then we have two lasers on each side here, so we know what is a meter. And then we just drag this over the bottom for whatever 500 meters or a kilometer. And then afterwards, I'll show you a bit of video, we actually analyze we actually count the conchs. So I'll try to show you how that looks, a bit of video. No. I'll help you, there's one there already. See if you can find a few more. Oops. Yeah. Alright, so that's one there. Oh, one. Another one there. You can see the laser here, the other laser there, so that's a meter. So you're looking for things on the screen that are about this big. I think there's another one there. Anyway, you more or less get the drift. So we've been doing this both on the Saba bank and on Statia. So as an old science, it sounds really exciting until you have to analyze 100 of these movies. But that's unfortunately, that's the thing of it. It does have to happen. So this is another student of mine on Statia. All the blue spots. On each spot he's done 3 dives, 3 transects, because of course we can't drag a camera through a reefy area. That would be a little bit risky. I mean, damage everything and we lose the cameras. So she's been doing dives, and these red and pink spots, that's sort of the distance between the beginning and the end of the transect. Now we're still in the middle of analyzing all this stuff, but roughly you get an idea like this. So these white things mean no conch, and then it goes up, the red dots are up to 100 or 500 conchs per hectare. So you really see nicely on Statia, the area before the town. There's a big rubble field here because the oil tankers land there, and they sort of have flattened the whole area, but the conch seem to like it. You don't see any conch actually in the shallows, but you do find good conch numbers there. Like I said, this we're doing at the Saba bank at the moment, because you may or may not know, the Saba bank used to be fished extremely heavily for conch. It was shut down at the beginning of the 1990s when they found, I think, 2 shipping containers full of illegally harvested conch meat on the Saba bank. And that's when the Coast Guard came in and pretty much swept the whole Saba bank and pretty much removed any fishermen that didn't belong to Saba off the bank, so roughly since the mid-1990s. So there hasn't been any conch fishing on the Saba bank for quite a while. So we're just actually curious, like, have they come back? And have they come back in sufficient numbers to allow, for example, maybe a fishery again in the near future? The other thing, and what we're going to do tomorrow is, like I said, we want to know something about the conch, where are they, and their densities. But also for management, you want to know something about when do the conch reproduce, and at what size do they reproduce. Again, that's basic information for your fisheries management. So the people who are going to join me tomorrow are going to go what we call a reproductive behavior survey. Sounds very complicated, but it's quite simple. We just go to a conch area, and every conch we encounter, we quickly measure the lip thickness, and we record whether the distance to the nearest conch. If they're paired, we say paired. If they're copulating, if you see 2 conch together, the male is behind, the female is in front, and you lift it slowly, you'll actually see the male thing and the female thing. So if you really gently, you will see it retract. So at least you know then which one is the male and which one is the female. otherwise it's quite hard to see with these animals. You might see this, egg laying. Like I said, sometimes you have to find a conch because they can be quite sort of cryptic, so to speak. So it's a very simple survey. We just do this every month and see when we actually see some activity. We've been doing this now on Statia since May. This is some work done on another island where you see that the main activity occurs sort of May, June, July, August. We've actually been seeing the same thing on Statia. We see in May and June we start copulating and then it stopped again. After the copulating you get the egg laying. Oh, that's what we saw. Copulating stopped, egg laying started, and I expect that the survey will this month that all these points will sort of start dropping down again. So it's a very simple survey and you don't have to do it every year, but it gives you some really simple information. When does my organism reproduce? So if I want to put in a regulation like protect my breeding stock, then you know which month you need to close your fishery. These are some of the examples of egg laying. And again, here's another cryptic little conch for you. So, tomorrow when we go out there, there's a couple of things you need to remember. One of the problems in the whole Caribbean is that all the legal size measurements are based on the size of the animal. But size is a really poor indicator of maturity in conch. Because conch grow like me. When I was young, I grew very quickly in length. When I grew older, I just became fatter. That's exactly what a conch does. In a couple of years, it grows to its maximum size, which is around 18-20 centimeter in length. And then at least it becomes thicker. First of all, it forms, like this is a young one, this is an older one, it becomes this nice little lip, and the lip becomes thicker and thicker and thicker. So pretty much all regulations in the Caribbean based on shell length are basically biologically wrong, because you might have the adult length, but what you need is an adult thickness of the lip. They have been doing some studies now where they looked at the correlation, the relationship between the thickness of the lip and again whether or not they were reproductively active. And you see that you need about 2 centimeters of lip thickness before a conch is actually sexually mature. So lip thickness is a much better indicator for reproductive activity than the shell length. Now we've done this on Statia where we collected a lot of gonad tissues. Now, where do you find a gonad in a conch? We had to learn that last year too. Alright, conch reproductive biology 101. Would this be the male or the female? The male. Very good. That's the female, that's the male. The gonad actually sits, if you sort of take the whole animal out, looks a bit yucky, it's sort of the tip of the spiral that sits all the way in the back of the animal. The little tip here, this little yellow layer here is actually the gonad. And that's where the eggs and the sperm sits. So when a fisherman cleans the conchs, we just sit there, and usually they throw this away. Let me quickly take it, and we cut a little piece out here. And I'm waiting now for a CITES permit, because it's protected by CITES. I cannot just take conch from one country to another. You need a permit for that. So hopefully next month I get a permit and actually analyze these things back in Holland. Now, the reason is, why do we go to all this trouble for conch on Statia? Well, sometimes the government works in funny ways. I mean, we have a lot of crisis in Holland, so the government always says, no, we're not going to have what we call personal sort of projects, etc., etc. But what happened on Statia was, because after these constitutional changes, St. Martin is now a different country. So the fishermen on Statia are not allowed to sell their conch anymore to St. Martin without a proper permit from CITES. So the guys are stuck. They can't export there. Before that, it was part of Holland, or the Netherlands, and this was one country. Now St. Martin also is a different country. And St. Martin has told the fishermen that we don't accept your conch unless you get your proper papers. So pretty much my role there is to find out how many conch there are, when do they reproduce, what size do they reproduce. Then I have to write a report about that. Then the government has to decide, do we or don't we want a fishery. If they say we do want to have a legal fishery, then that report has to go to CITES, and then CITES has to read that report. In that report we would of course come up with a number where we say, for example, it is sustainable to collect 5,000 tons from this population. Then CITES reads the report and does or does not approve the suggested quota. And then again, then the fishermen can start fishing legally and they can export the, yep.
What's the time frame on that?
For Stacia,
Well, no, for the CITES permitting.
well, there will be a first time for us too. So this year went really well with the data collecting. So I'm confident we have enough information about the distribution and biology on Stacia. So I think next year I can produce a report to the station government. Let's say the first half of next year. Then the government has decided whether or not they want to go to CITES. My gut feeling would be that that's probably a 6 to 12 month process at least.
So in the meantime, they're getting a rest?
The conch.
Yeah.
Well, I think what happens on Stacia is that the fishery is tolerated, which is another sort of Dutch thing if you know about marijuana in Holland. It's not legal, it's tolerated. I think at the moment the fisherman cannot export conch and has not been exporting conch because he doesn't want to take the risk to St. Martin. Now technically speaking on Stacia and on Saba, I think people can collect some conch for their personal use. So technically speaking, I think what that fisherman is doing would be illegal, but it's sort of tolerated now because it's only one fisherman. The conch he's catching, this guy here, is all massive, massive mature conch. I mean, it's all way above 2 centimeter thickness. So at the moment, because this guy has been doing what he's been doing for years, so at the moment it looks like the government is sort of leaving them alone. And then we'll see whether or not the fishery will be legalized.
But is he not collecting less because he's not exporting?
He is collecting a bit less than he wants. So he's told me actually what he would like to collect, what would be a normal way for him to make a living. I've got a feeling at the moment he's collecting less. For example, when there's carnival, then there's a little bit of an upsurge, then he collects a couple of hundred conchs for festivals, etc. But the whole thing will be, of course, I'll stick my neck out and try to see if this fishery can be legal, but I hope that the managers are smart enough that there is well, I'm not going to pronounce this, but there's a working group between conch where scientists from all different countries actually come together and try to come up with advice for good conch management. They've actually come up last year with their first report. They come up with a whole bunch of sort of measurements that if you're going to create a fishery, at least make sure that you adhere to blah, 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 blah. So what I like about this is that it's a very small scale fishery in Stacia. It's only one guy. So probably whatever he collects fits within sustainable limits. It'll be interesting to see that if the government decides to open the fishery, whether they do it right from day one and actually come up with a proper management system and make sure that the fisherman keeps cooperating with research, and as soon as he does something that he's not allowed to, if he's crossing his CITES permit, then they just again revoke it. There's going to be a test case. I think this might also be what we might look at in the next couple of years for the Saba Bank, depending on what's happening there with the conch. Again, my role is to just count the conch. It's not my decision whether you're going to fish them or not. Just my job is to figure out what's going on there after 20 years of non-fishing, after they come back. Another important thing is keep the fishermen involved. We actually had quite an interesting fishery meeting yesterday. It was, I would say, the first real one, because some management has been, there is some legislation being written at the moment that after 1st of December, a small area of the Saba Bank will be closed. There's a spawning aggregation of small groups of red hind, and the fishermen have been not fishing there for a couple of years sort of by themselves anyway. So, but it looks now that the legislation will be written for December 1st, and there will be, there's going to be a small area, the Moonfish Bank, will be closed for fishing in the months of December, January and February. So we're actually slowly making some progress there, which is again a new thing, because I think there has been research before, but no follow-up on that from management. And it looks like we are slowly in a nicer system at the moment.
Do you know how old the conch are when they reach reproductive size?
About 4 years.
And what about lobster?
Also about 4 to 5 years. Yeah. They grow much older, of course.
Yeah.
Like the conchs also at least must be around 20s. The lobster can also get a couple of decades old. But it takes about 4 to 5 years to get to legal size, 95 millimeters. Yeah. Now the last thing I want to talk about is actually a little sort of sidekick program that we're actually running with Saba. Is that I found out at some point that when you guys go diving with these guys, that the dive instructors, which I have to thank very much by the way, are every cool things you see during the dive, your dive instructors have to come back to the office and type it into the computer. Now one of the cool things are always sharks. So when I heard about that, I said, well, why don't we see if we can tweak that database a little bit, and I can actually start using that information again as another source of information. So what I have now the dives, the observation records of almost 2,000 dives. On those 2,000 dives, about 1,000 sharks have been sighted. I went diving myself. I saw a reef shark, but I went up too quickly because the people who were 10 meters below me saw then at the end of the dive a hammerhead shark came by, so I missed that one. So I still have never seen a hammerhead shark. But they will probably show up in the database, I guess, today. So what we've done actually is like every 3 months, every 6 months, they just send me an update from the database. I mean, there's lots of other animals in it. I only analyze it for sharks. But I can tell you now roughly exactly where you want to go at what time to see a shark. These are all the dive sites here. And not a surprise, but it's these outer pinnacles here where you see your sharks. On average, 2 a dive on these sites here. For some reason, I find it quite surprising. Hot springs, but maybe the dive instructors can tell me about it. Hot springs, one of the shallow sites, actually also has quite a high frequency of sightings. A few other things. What's the best time to come to watch sharks here? Well, you're pretty much getting right into the season now. So October, November, December, there's on average, if you compare all the dives, all the dive sites, there's a chance of pretty much seeing a shark per dive, and it drops down a little bit sort of in spring and summer. Now what kind of shark are you going to see here? Mainly Caribbean reef shark, which is this guy here with the darker fin. This is the black tip reef shark, which has actually a light fin. I know it, I don't make up these names, you just got to live with it. The black tips are not reported that much, but again, sometimes it's quite hard to distinguish these two, because the reef shark we saw today, Aaron, I thought it was a black tip actually, but I'm not 100% sure myself, because again, I'm not really that good with shark identification. There's of course the hammerhead there. There's mainly your Caribbean reef sharks and your nurse sharks. Now where do you see them? We're going to depth, the deep sides. You go around 30 meters on the pinnacle or deeper sides, there's a good chance you see them. This was actually made today at the Green Island, because we have nice flat weather. It was also the first time to get out there. I'd like to thank you for your attention. If there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Do you have any
They
data?
really like to eat it. It's really good meat. People really, yeah.
Most of the queen triggers are landed, yeah. If you want to know the exact numbers, I'll come back to you tomorrow and I can tell you that. Any other questions? Whoops. That means two things. Either it was clear or it was too scary and boring. No more questions?
Yeah. Maybe I couldn't see properly, but I didn't see lionfish mentioned in the discards.
Yes. I had to make the decision. We do, as part of the fisheries monitoring, we also ask the fishermen how many lionfish they caught. What we see on the Saba bank is that especially the deep water traps, like the snapper traps, catch quite a bit of lionfish. Not so much yet on the top of the bank, especially on the deeper sides in the redfish traps. We do keep records on the number of lionfish being landed or discarded. Yeah.
Right. It wasn't significant enough to include in your breakdown of discards?
No. So it didn't pop up there compared to all the other discards. But we do keep track of it. If things change, we can monitor it. Oops.
For your work and why line so that,
Right.
is that a reason why the fishermen are cooperative?
The way sort of I'm funded, so to speak, is as when these constitutional changes happened, then I guess my government, the Dutch government, all of a sudden were like, oh, we have responsibilities now on these islands. They're still trying to figure out, with regards to fisheries, what is island issues, what are Dutch issues, and they're still working on that. It hasn't really been crystallized yet. So the way I'm funded is from funding that they call BO funding, which is policy supporting funding, which is usually short-term money, which is available, and all of a sudden the government doesn't know anything, so that money becomes available to do a research program. But that funding usually is only short-term, a couple of years. It's not sort of money that will keep us doing this for what should be done for the next 10 or 20 years. So what I've been negotiating with my government for the last 2 years is actually to change the funding from BO, so when this program is finished, to a program in Holland called WOT, which is sort of the obligatory research programs that they have to do for all the stock monitoring of the Dutch fisheries. It's a struggle, I'm still positive, but I'm trying to get probably a smaller budget than I have now, but to have a basic budget for the next 10-20 years under the normal fisheries program within the Ministry of Agriculture. We're not there yet, but I'm still optimistic.
How much of the Saba Bank is regulated by the Dutch government?
Sorry?
What surface area?
Okay, what you have in the Saba Bank is about a third of the Saba Bank falls within the 12-mile zone, and then it comes into the economic exclusive zone. As far as I know, and I'm not the expert on the rules and regulations, is that especially from between 12 and 200 miles, that falls on the Dutch responsibility. Within the 12 miles, there's definitely a local component there. But what you hope to see is that there's good cooperation between local government and Dutch government. So you don't end up with a whole sweep of rules for the first 12 miles, and then a whole set of other rules between the 12 and the 200 miles. So the idea is there to make sure that we end up with one set of rules supported by both governments. Otherwise it will be a nightmare from the start.
If the lionfish are a problem, why are they thrown back?
It's interesting because I was on Curacao the other day, and there the lionfish actually fetch quite a high price, and it's a welcome income source to fishermen. And I've got students there that go on Bonaire, they go shooting lionfish on the weekend and sell it to the restaurants, and they actually earn a nice little winner with that. Actually, we're complaining on Curacao that the lionfish stocks were going down because they were losing a bit of income there. That's how it works with these things, and it's interesting here. They do land lionfish here, but for somehow it hasn't really maybe been in enough numbers for the fishermen to say, hey, we're gonna actually try to see if there's a market for it. That step hasn't been set here. While on other islands, it actually is being marketed, sold and produced. It hasn't happened yet here. The fishermen, when they do catch a lionfish, they don't throw them back, they bring them in, feed them to tarpons mostly. Anything else? Yep.
What did you say they did with them?
Feed them to
When they catch them, the lionfish, they don't throw them back. They actually bring them in the harbor, and then they feed them to the tarpons. A nice big fish that you see down the harbor here. So 1.5 meter herrings. Anything else in the corner? All right, thank you very much.
We'd also like to thank our sponsors tonight, Eden Restaurant, upstairs. Something smelling awful good up there. We'd also like to thank Juliana's Hotel for hosting Dr. de Graaf on his stay here.
Oh, okay.
We're winding down Sea&Learn. We're getting down into the last 9 or 10 days, but no lack of activities, believe me. Tomorrow afternoon we have a dive going out at 1 o'clock with Dr. de Graaf and Saba. Unfortunately the boat is full. It's a very, very popular dive. I did it with Martin the other day with the Yelp kids, and it was a real hoot, a lot of fun. Then on Monday morning we have a field trip going out with Dr. Jennifer Ron to Wells Bay where she's going to be measuring the beach, and Jennifer's here somewhere, or she was. There she is back there. And you can sign up for that at the tent. Then Monday evening we move to Scout's Place where Dr. Sonka Johnson, and he is here somewhere, I think. Just arrived on the island?
Right in the back.
Right in the back. Wave your hand. There we are. He's going to be speaking about jellyfish. That's Monday. Tuesday, oh yes, we will also have a presentation from Pepe from the Organics Farm, who's going to be talking about a mushroom farmery, or a mushroom growing operation, and some research he's doing there. Tuesday, we have, I don't think we have anything Tuesday. Wednesday night, we move to the Sea Witch restaurant, where, again, Dr. Jennifer Ron is going to be giving a presentation on tent reef. Thursday, we have a dive going out in the afternoon, probably with Saba and Dr. Sonka Johnson. There is room on that boat. Do sign up because these marine projects fill very, very quickly. On Friday, we move up to Shearwater Resort, where again, Sonka Johnson's going to be talking about wonders of the deep, which should be pretty interesting. If you want to make dinner reservations for any of the venue, you can make them directly at the restaurant or stop by the tent. We'll be happy to make them for you. On Sunday night, we are going to be at the Eugenia Center. Food is going to be available through the Organics Farm, so it should be some interesting stuff. And we're also going to be showing the movie Revolution, which we hope will shake you to the core and wake everybody up and help save our planet. Thank you to our supporters. See you Monday night. Good night now.